In the classification problem, I introduced the idea of linear separation. This idea is that data that is linearly separable can easily be classified if you draw a linear decision boundary in the right place. But data is really almost never that straightforward, and you will need to bring in non-linearity to identify patterns in complex data to make accurate predictions about them. In the past videos, I've been building up to the idea that neural networks can unlock this complex task of understanding data at a higher dimension. Today is the day we make that concrete. To start out, I want to highlight an important case. When logistic regression was still the newest toy in statistics, two pioneers in AI, Marvin Minsky and Seymour Papert, wrote a paper in 1969 presenting a very special case that logistic regression could not solve. This is known as the XOR problem, and it's a very simple looking graph. But let's break this down into chunks. Let's think about some logical operators that can be expressed with inputs x1 and x2 and output y. When you want to express the intersection of x1 and x2, aka the AND case, you might represent this in a table like this. When x1 and x2 are both zeros, or when one of the two x's is 1, then y is equal to 0. But when x1 and x2 are both 1s, then y is equal to 1. Similarly, you might want to express the OR case as follows. When neither of the x's is 1, then y is 0. When both x's are either zeros or 1s, then y is 1. Also, when both of them are 1, then y is also 1. Makes sense, right? There are some more uncommon examples like the NAND or the NOT AND operator, which can be expressed in a similar manner. Now, the XOR operator is the OR operator where the intersection is negated, like this. This can be expressed with the x's and the y like this, where only when there is a disagreement between the x's is when y is 1. Let's take a look at these in graphs. In this view, x1 and x2 are in the x and the y axes respectively, and the highlighted portion in the Venn diagram, where y is equal to 1, is represented as the plus sign. For the AND case, we can linearly separate where y is 1 apart from where y is 0. And you can do the same exercise with the OR and the NAND operators. But when you get to the XOR operator, you cannot separate the two pluses and the two minuses with a single linear line. If you want to solve the XOR problem, you need something that is a little bit more complex. Well, it turns out, a combination of these operators can actually theoretically solve the XOR. Take a look at this. We have x1 and x2, which is our XOR inputs, but we also have h1, which is the OR of x1 and x2, and h2, which is the NAND of x1 and x2. When you take the AND operator of the two intermediary h functions, you actually get a result that matches XOR output. This is the simplest idea of a network with one hidden layer of intermediate function. We have inputs x1 and x2, a hidden layer of h1 and h2, and the output y. What does this mean? It means that a linear combination of operators can be used to represent the XOR problem, where previously it was thought to have been impossible. This hidden layer is what allows the representation of XOR. If you actually build a simple neural network model, this is what it would look like. Looks familiar, right? You can visualize this learning process. On the left is a linear model built with the neural network without any hidden layers. In other words, it's just a linear model with one layer and a sigmoid activation function. You can see loss being minimized at just below 0.7, and it kinda gets stuck there. Compare that to the right when one hidden layer is added in, you can see loss effectively dropping to 0 after enough epochs. Now, in contrast to the linear model, we now have 9 parameters just with 2 x inputs and 1 hidden layer. For each hidden neuron and the output, there's a bias term and 2 weight variables. If we know the approximate weights and biases, we can calculate the learned values, with some simple mathematics of plugging in values to formulas. But I won't go over the details of this progress. In the end, the result should be that y ends up as 0, 1, 1, 0. The important thing to note here is that even in this very simple example, we have to go up to 9-dimensional space to really know what's going on. Trying to do these mathematics for anything more complicated is very difficult, so we rely on a model to do this. And this is exactly what a neural network is. This shape that we made with one hidden layer is probably the simplest looking neural network, but it shows the right intuition. With the hidden layer added, we were able to solve a problem that a one-dimensional linear method could not. The resulting decision boundary looks like this. Now, imagine what we would be able to do as we increase this simple network to this, or even this. When we get to this point, the calculations involved become something out of this world, even though each one of these connections between the neurons is a simple function. This is why a neural network is so important in today's machine learning. It allows the learning of extremely complex data that even humans wouldn't be able to do. And it makes up the building blocks of the crazy stuff that current AI can do. Ironically, the term neural network comes from the idea that these networks look and function in a similar way to our actual human brain networks. I'm not a neuroscientist, so we won't go deep into this idea, but the key concept is that these artificial neural networks can learn patterns that really are hard to express with traditional mathematical instructions. But rather, it can almost intuitively just figure out the patterns, similar to how our brain just recognizes patterns without really thinking about it. The piece that allows this learning is what's called a backpropagation. Backpropagation is a gradient estimation method that allows the training of the neural network. It's essentially the agent that looks at the neural network output and then puts it back into the beginning of the network to repeat the training. But it's not just a simple repetition. In gradient descent, we make predictions. We then compute the loss, and then we compute the gradient of the loss. Then we backpropagate this loss backwards through the network to determine how much each weight and bias contributed to this loss. Then we can update the parameters in the network such that if we do the forward pass again, we'd be a little bit closer to the true labels than before. This computation, when there's many hidden layers with many neurons, is done with a bit of calculus that we won't go over. But the important thing is that each pass through the network yields a small change in the output, and over thousands of passes, the neural network learns to perform better and better. This structure is called the feed-forward neural network. On top of this, we also have activation functions, which we talked about in the last video. Remember, without activation functions, the neural network is just a linear combination. So you have to have the activation function. You can think about activation functions as just another layer of the network next to the hidden layers. This whole thing goes back through backpropagation. But there's one more thing. The optimizer is the method of learning through loss minimization. We talked about stochastic gradient descent, which is just one of the ways to optimize the finding of the loss. Optimizing loss is going to be directly impacting how the model updates its parameters, so these must work along with the backpropagation process. This is the last part of the neural network before you can finally settle on the model. So I want to close off with a demonstration. This site allows you to visualize the neural network learning over epochs. Let's go back to an example of the data that we could not solve with this simple linear separator. Take this spiral data. Neural networks allows us to build a model that can understand and predict this pattern. Watch as I demonstrate how a neural network solves this spiral problem. I've just created some hidden layers, which are just all linear functions. But with enough epochs, very cool, right?